Welcome back to Leviticus as we continue teaching through the Bible and we continue to see how can a holy God be with an unholy people. So that's the question that kind of shows up at the end of Exodus, and now we have Leviticus answering that. So we've already seen the sacrificial system right up there, chapters 1 through 10. Then we've seen this distinction between clean and unclean, chapters 11 through 15. And now we get to what's the pinnacle of Leviticus, I would think. What's kind of, everything's been going up to this point right here. So everything's been building up to it. This is the Day of Atonement. So if you have a calendar that you look at, you may see Yom Kippur written there as one of the days on the calendar, just like you see December 25th, Christmas, right? You have whichever Thursday, whatever number day that is in November, you say Thanksgiving. You see President's Day. Different calendars will have these different days that are various holidays, and a number of them will have some days that you may not recognize, and Yom Kippur is one that is on some of those calendars. So if you see that on your calendar, if you see Yom Kippur, that is the Hebrew word for Day of Atonement. And so the word atonement we get, that's being at one with God. Atone is at one with God. How can we be at one with a holy God when we are unholy? Well, we have this day of covering. The word Kippur, it's from the word for covering, so something that's covering over our sin, and that's how God can be with us. Now, this is starts in chapter 16. This is the entirety of chapter 16, and we see here it begins by talking about the most holy place and Aaron entering that holy place. So you have the tabernacle. It's got two areas. It's got a bigger area and a smaller area. That bigger area, the priests go in there, they burn incense in there, and then you have the smaller area, which is the most holy place. And you can't just go into that holy place just any time. In fact, it says in verse 2, "And Yahweh said to Moses, Tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat that is on the ark, so that he may not die." And that's talking about the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is what's in there. All the other furniture that's in the tabernacle, it's on the bigger area. It's in the bigger section. It's not in that little section that is the shape of a cube. That section is just the Ark of the Covenant and the contents that are inside the Ark of the Covenant. And so there, he can't just go anytime he wants. And that's what that means. It might be a little confusing, the phrasing there. It says in verse 2, what we just read, he is not to come at any time into the holy place. That doesn't mean that he's never to come in there. So sometimes the way things are worded, it might be a little confusing at first, but the context lets us know what it actually means. So it does say, in this way, so verse 3, but in this way Aaron shall come into the holy place. So there's this holy place, this area at the back of the tabernacle, and he can go in there, but only in a very specific way, only in very specific circumstances. And so it's not. So what this means when it says he's not to come at any time, it doesn't mean he's never allowed to come. It means he can't just come whenever he wants to. There's a very specific way this has to go. And it's very important to notice how the context makes things more clear. We had something back in Exodus where it was talking about servitude and how it talks about if a master strikes a servant, then and he survives a day or two, then that's not something that the master is going to be punished for. That's not something where the master has done something wrong. But if he dies, then that's bad. Master has done something wrong, and the master is then punished for that because what he's done is evil in killing his slave. And so some people will take that to mean, oh, well, that means if he survives 3 days and he dies on the third day, then it's all fine. And that's not what it's saying. You look at the next verses below, the context says doing something that is harmful, doing something that's damaging, you bust their tooth, you bust their eye, then that's a problem. The master's not supposed to be beating the slave like this. So in that case, you can take two different understandings of it and come to two very different conclusions about what it's saying. If you look at the context, it's saying that that it's not that it's okay if the servant dies in 3 days. That's not what it's saying. And here, it's not saying that Aaron cannot ever come into the holy place. It's saying there's a certain way. And so what is that way? Well, that way is very specific. It's one time a year, and it's only the high priest, no other priest. You can have other priests like Aaron's sons. Only the high priest can do this, and he can only do it once a year. He does it a very specific way. He wears different clothes. He has to ceremonially wash. So he's washing himself, so he's ritually clean. He sacrifices a bull for himself because he is a sinner, and he has to sacrifice for himself. We see Hebrews talks about Jesus, who's better than any other high priest, because unlike all the other high priests, he doesn't have to give a sacrifice for himself because he is perfect already. But the high priest, has to do everything he can to be ceremonially prepared to go into this holy place. And the mercy seat that it talks about there, that's talking about the lid on the Ark of the Covenant. And so here we have him go in and do this sacrificial process, and he does it with a number of sacrifices, including specific here 2 goats. And he takes 2 goats, and those goats, actually each of them, depending on how you're looking at it, you look at one in one angle, you look at one the other angle, and they're both pointing us to Jesus in their own ways. So let's look at the angle of each of them to see what this is pointing to and what the purpose of this is. So you get your 2 goats, right? And so the one goat, so first, which goat is going to be which? Well, they cast lots. So, take some dice, it may seem like kind of like a gambling thing to us, but to them, this was a process divinely ordained by God, and it may be something where they used what's called the Urim and Thummim. They had these 2 rocks. So let's say we got the 2 rocks, right? And they had it in a bag in the pouch that the high priest had. He reaches a hand in. Which one came out? Oh, it's that one. Maybe one represents one of them. Maybe the other one represents the second goat. You pick one up. Oh, it's that one. That means it's this goat. So that's this process where you figure out which goat is which. So when you pick the one goat, this is what's called, actually you may have heard this term, scapegoat. That's where we get the term scapegoat. That's from this process right here in the Bible, in Leviticus 16. So you have this goat, and this goat is going to be taken aside, and we'll see what happens to this goat starting in verse 7. Then he shall take the 2 goats and set them before Yahweh at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Aaron shall cast lots over the 2 goats, one lot for Yahweh, and the other lot, in some translations, it'll say, and the other lot for Azazel. Now, that is because there is this idea that there's this goat demon in the wilderness called Azazel. That's not really probably the best way to look at this. This word here, which some just transliterate, they just take the letters and switch them letter for letter to be Azazel, that actually essentially means the goat of leaving. So the goat that's going away, that's what that phrase actually is. So one for Yahweh and one for the goat of leaving. So the goat that's going to be sent away, and that's what we see happens. And Aaron shall present the goat on which the lot fell for Yahweh and use it as a sin offering. So one lot, says, okay, that one, that's a sin offering. What about the one that is for the goat of leaving? So what's going to happen with this goat of leaving? Well, let's look here. Verse 10, but the goat on which the lot fell for the goat of leaving, or for Azazel, as some translations say, shall be presented alive before Yahweh to make atonement over it, that it may be sent away into the wilderness as the goat of leaving. So basically, you have this goat, and it's going to be sent off into the wilderness, and they're going to put their hands, the high priest will put his hands on that goat. And putting the hands on the goat, it's symbolically saying our sin is being passed upon you. Our sin is being placed upon you. And now that goat is sent off into the wilderness to a place that is an excluded place, a place away from the community. And so that goat is taking upon itself the sins of the people and symbolically bringing them away into the wasteland. Now, of course, this is what Jesus did for us. Jesus took our sins upon himself at the cross. So he was essentially the scapegoat. So this all is pointing us to, hey, how is our sin going to be removed? This is a yearly process. Here, the book of Hebrews says Jesus doesn't have to keep doing it over and over again. He did it once for all because he's better than the goat, the sin offering goat and the scapegoat. He's better than that. And so he is the one that was sent off and took the sin upon himself. But then you also have the one that was for just the sin offering that was then sacrificed as a sin offering, and we've talked about those before in previous videos earlier on in our Leviticus stuff. And so you should already know about that, and you can go watch those again, or if you haven't seen those yet, you can go back and watch those videos. I'll put a link below to the sin offering to have a better understanding of what the sin offering in general is. But so that other goat is going to be a sin offering, going to use its blood to cover all of these different things around the location, the tabernacle. And the covering is a covering of blood. It's not totally doused in it, but it is representatively covered in that blood. And of course, this is Jesus. Jesus' blood representatively covers us, covers our sin. And that's why we have a Day of Atonement, the Yom Kippur, Day of Covering. So it's covering of blood, covering that protects us, that covers over our sin, so that God does not see this sin as something that must be dealt with because Jesus has dealt with it. Now, of course, at that time, Leviticus 16, he hasn't dealt with it yet, but it's pointing forward to that. So God's people in the Old Testament, they couldn't trust in the one who had already sacrificed himself. They trusted in the one who was going to sacrifice himself. This was to point forward to Jesus, so they would point themselves to what was going to happen. They could trust in the one who was able, who was going to be the sacrifice. And that doesn't mean they always understood that. That doesn't mean everybody got that as the imagery back then. But go read Hebrews, and it says very clearly this is what that's for. That this is all pointing to Jesus, to what he did. This is what they saw in the Old Testament, but it points forward to a greater truth in the New Testament. So you have these two goats. The sins of the people are confessed onto the one goat. It's sent away. The other goat is used as the sin offering, and its blood is covering over things. And that's where we get the Day of Atonement. So that's leading us into this affliction. It says that the people will afflict themselves just one day a year. There are a lot of actual feasts, celebrations, but here it's a little different. It says that all the people are involved, even though we've just been looking mostly at like what's the high priest doing, right? But all the people are involved in this because this is for all the people. This is covering over all the sins of the whole nation once a year. And here it says affliction. What it's talking about is oftentimes you'll have like these feasts, these celebrations. Well, here it's more of a fast, more of a humbling. People are to be humbled, and perhaps they're not eating, they're fasting. It's the opposite of a feast. And so that's when it's talking about affliction. It's probably not saying like physically hurting themselves. That's more likely a fast. They're not having food. They're not feasting and doing the opposite thing because they're supposed to be paying attention to this and knowing that this is their sin. This is a serious thing. This is something that they should take very seriously. And there needs to be a way to fix that. There needs to be a solution. And this points them forward to that solution. Right now, they can't feast. They can't celebrate because of their sin. But it's all, again, this is all pointing to Jesus. All over and over again, we see this. In fact, actually, Romans 3 actually says that Jesus is the mercy seat as well. We looked at that earlier. It mentions the mercy seat. And that's the lid, the covering over the Ark of the Covenant. And it actually says in here that they're throwing blood onto that. And in Romans, that it says Jesus is that mercy seat. And so there's so many ways in which this points us to Jesus. But we see here what Jesus' work was to do, this pointing forward to that. And so that is going to wrap up Leviticus 16. Next time, we're going to try to get through a larger section, several chapters, and we're going to be talking about what comes next after this Day of Atonement, a new manual, right? We had the manual of sacrifice, the manual of cleanliness, the manual, the Day of Atonement. We're going to have a manual or instructions on holiness. Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.